No one at the shelter understood why the old German shepherd refused to eat, refused to sleep, and refused to look at anyone. He just sat there, silent and unmoving, staring at the door like he was waiting for someone who would never return. People walked past him every day, choosing younger dogs, happier dogs, dogs without scars. But everything changed the moment Officer Ryan stepped inside. The dog suddenly stood up, his eyes locked onto him. Then the officer noticed the metal tag hanging from the dog's worn-out collar. 6 haunting words were engraved on it, words that froze Ryan's breath and sent chills down his spine. The message would uncover a secret and leave everyone shocked. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The shelter was quieter than usual that morning, wrapped in the kind of cold stillness that made every sound echo a little longer than it should. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming softly as they illuminated rows of metal kennels. Most of the dogs barked or whimpered whenever footsteps approached, desperate for attention, desperate for anyone who would stop and look. But inside the far corner kennel, where the lights barely reached, sat a dog who didn't make a sound. A large German shepherd, once powerful and proud, lay curled on a thin blanket, his ribs faintly visible beneath his coat. His fur, once bright and striking, had dulled to a lifeless shade. His ears perked half-heartedly at the clatter of a food bowl being placed down the aisle, but he didn't move toward it. He just watched, quietly, patiently, as if he had long since stopped expecting kindness. The shelter staff called him Shadow, not because he was dark or silent, but because he seemed to fade into the background like he was trying to disappear. Other dogs barked wildly as people toured the shelter, but Shadow remained still, his deep amber eyes following every visitor with a calm, haunting sadness. "Poor boy," murmured Claire, the shelter attendant who had tried everything to help him get adopted. She paused at his kennel, kneeling down to push a treat toward him. "You deserve better than this." Shadow didn't even sniff it. Claire sighed. "Another showing today. But you know how it goes. People want puppies, not retirees." Every day it was the same. Families walked through the aisles, pausing at energetic younger dogs who jumped and wagged their tails. Shadow's kennel was often skipped entirely. On the rare occasion someone stopped, the moment they saw the words "Retired Police K9" on his chart, they quietly backed away. "He's probably aggressive. He won't bond again. He's too old." Claire heard the whispers every day, and every day Shadow heard them too. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew what he had been, through. None of them knew why he had stopped hoping. As sunlight streamed faintly through the high windows, Shadow lifted his head and stared toward the entrance, like he was waiting for someone who would never come back. His breathing was slow, heavy, resigned. He wasn't just a retired dog. He wasn't just unwanted. He was a forgotten hero. And though everyone else walked past him, Shadow still waited for someone, anyone, to finally see him. Little did he know, today would be the day everything changed. Officer Ryan Cole stepped out of his patrol car and closed the door gently, as if even that small sound might disturb the heavy silence hanging over the shelter. He wasn't supposed to be here today. Technically, he was off duty. But whenever the weight on his heart felt too heavy, he found himself drifting back to this place, one of the few corners of the world that didn't demand anything from him. Ryan took a slow breath, straightening his uniform out of habit, rather than professionalism. His badge caught the morning light, glinting briefly before he walked through the shelter doors. Claire looked up from the reception desk and offered him a tired smile. "Back again, Officer Cole?" Ryan shrugged gently. "Just checking in. The usual." Claire knew better than to ask why. She had heard the story from someone at the precinct months ago, about the partner Ryan had lost, about how the silence in the patrol car never sounded the same afterward. Police officers grieved differently. Some shut down, some stayed busy, and some sought places like this, places filled with souls who had lost something too. Ryan walked down the aisle slowly, hands in his pockets. Dogs barked as he passed, tails wagging hopefully. He stopped now and then to scratch behind an ear or whisper a calming word. He didn't consider himself a dog expert, but he had always understood their eyes better than people's. Halfway down the row, he paused at an empty kennel, where a younger dog had been adopted last week. A faint smile touched his lips, the kind that flickered for half a second before fading again. "You'd like your new family," he murmured softly. He continued walking. Claire followed a few steps behind. "We got 3 new dogs yesterday," she said. 2 puppies and, well, 1 senior. Her voice dipped on the last words, as though she hated speaking them aloud. "Retired working dog. Complicated case." Ryan's brow furrowed. "Which kennel?" Claire hesitated before pointing toward the darker corner of the room. "End of the row, but don't get your hopes up. Nobody's been able to get him to respond." Ryan turned his head, eyes narrowing slightly as he looked toward the shadowed kennel. Something stirred in him, an instinct, a pull. Not curiosity, not duty. Something deeper. He didn't understand it yet. But he followed it. His boots echoed softly on the concrete floor as he walked, step by step, toward the dog who had already been given up on by the world. And in that moment, although he didn't know it yet, his life was about to cross paths with a forgotten hero. Ryan slowed as he approached the far corner of the shelter where the lights dimmed and the noise of barking dogs softened into a distant echo. The air felt heavier here, as though the shadows carried stories none of the other kennels dared to hold. He stopped in front of the last cage, and there he was, the retired K9, Shadow. At first glance, he looked like nothing more than an old, tired dog curled up on a blanket too thin for the cold floor. But Ryan felt something, an invisible pull, a presence that made the hair on his arms rise. This wasn't just any dog. This was a dog who had seen things, endured things, survived things. Shadow lifted his head slowly. His eyes met Ryan's with a depth that startled him. They were not aggressive, nor defeated, just painfully aware, as if Shadow could read Ryan the same way. A veteran officer reads a crime scene, quietly, accurately, without missing anything. Ryan knelt down, lowering himself to Shadow's level. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, keeping his voice calm, steady. Shadow didn't move closer, didn't retreat. He simply watched. The dog's gaze held a strange mixture of caution and familiarity, like he was trying to decide whether Ryan was a threat or something else, something he had lost long ago. Claire came up beside Ryan. "He doesn't usually react to anyone," she murmured. "Most folks walk by and he doesn't even look up." Ryan didn't look away from Shadow. "But he's looking at me." Claire folded her arms. "Yeah, that's new." Shadow shifted ever so slightly, straightening his posture. It wasn't a defensive stance, it was closer to instinct, like a soldier quietly acknowledging another soldier. There was discipline in the way he held his head, even in exhaustion. Ryan leaned a little closer, his heart tightening. "You used to serve, didn't you?" Shadow's ears twitched at the word serve. His eyes softened for a brief second, then dimmed again. Ryan recognized that look. He had seen it in veterans. He had seen it in fellow officers. He had seen it in the mirror. A look that said, "I remember, but it hurts to remember." Ryan placed his fingers through the metal bars very slowly, giving the dog space to decide. Shadow didn't move, but he didn't back away either. His breathing grew quieter, more controlled, like he was analyzing every detail of Ryan's presence. "He's not ignoring you," Ryan whispered. "He's studying you." Claire's eyebrows rose. He did that with his handler, apparently. Old habits. Ryan's chest tightened at the word handler. Something was off. Terribly off. This wasn't the behavior of a dog who had been abandoned by choice. This was the behavior of a dog waiting for someone who never came back. Shadow blinked slowly, his eyes never leaving Ryan's face. For the first time since entering the shelter, Ryan felt a chill crawl down his spine. Something about this dog wasn't just sad. It was wrong, deeply wrong, and he couldn't walk away now. Ryan remained crouched beside the kennel, eyes fixed on Shadow's steady, unblinking stare. There was a heaviness in the air, a story clawing beneath the dog's silence, begging to be told. Claire shifted her weight nervously, glancing between them. "You want to know what we were told about him?" she asked quietly. Ryan nodded without looking away from Shadow. Claire exhaled slowly. "He came in 3 weeks ago. Animal Control picked him up wandering alone near an abandoned warehouse outside the city. No microchip update, no recent vet records, nothing. Just this old collar and a history nobody wanted to explain." Ryan frowned. "Who surrendered him?" Claire hesitated. "That's the thing. Technically, no one did. He showed signs of training, serious training. So we ran the tag number through a database. That's when we found out he was a retired K9. She paused, her voice dropping. And that's when things got complicated. Shadow lowered his head slightly when she said the word K9, as if he recognized it, as if it pained him. Claire leaned against the kennel door, sadness pulling at her features. His record said he belonged to a handler named Officer Matt Hale. They were partners for years, one of the best teams on the force. Explosive detection, search and rescue, high-risk operations. This dog didn't just serve. He saved lives. Ryan swallowed hard. "So, where's the handler now?" Claire looked down. "We don't know." Ryan turned to her, eyebrows tightening. "What do you mean, you don't know?" "Exactly that," she whispered. "The department didn't give details. Just that the handler wasn't in a position to care for him anymore." The words were strange, cold, rehearsed. Ryan knew deflection when he heard it. Claire continued softly. "They said someone would come for Shadow, but no one ever did. Days passed, then weeks, and eventually the officer in charge signed the release. They left him here." Ryan's jaw clenched. He looked at Shadow, who sat with quiet dignity even in misery. A dog who had served with loyalty, discarded like an old tool. Claire brushed a hand over her arm. "We tried putting him up for adoption, but people see retired police dog and assume he's dangerous or broken. They want easy pets, not ones with scars." Her voice cracked slightly. "But it's his eyes that get me. He watches the door every morning, like he still hopes someone will come back for him." Ryan felt a heaviness settle in his chest. Shadow wasn't just waiting. He was grieving. And Ryan, without knowing why, suddenly felt responsible for finding the truth. Ryan shifted closer to the kennel, lowering himself until he was almost eye level with Shadow. The dog's gaze followed him with slow, deliberate movement. No fear, no aggression, just a quiet alertness that felt heavier than anything Ryan had seen in years. "Easy, boy," Ryan murmured, keeping his voice calm, steady. His fingers brushed lightly against the cold metal bars. Shadow didn't retreat, didn't flinch. If anything, he leaned forward a fraction as though assessing him, testing him. Ryan's attention drifted to the dog's neck. Shadow's collar was old, far too old for a recently surrendered dog. The leather was cracked, stretched, worn thin in places. Yet it had clearly been well cared for once. Cleaned regularly, handled with affection. Used during long nights and dangerous missions. He saw a small metal plate attached to the collar, its edges dulled with age. Strange, most modern K9 units used microchips, digital tags, clean brass ID plates. This one looked handmade, personal. Ryan narrowed his eyes. "What's that?" he whispered. Claire leaned closer, confusion crossing her face. We thought it was just an old ID tag. Looked scratched up. Couldn't read it well. Ryan gently reached toward the kennel bars again, slower this time. Shadow. Let me see, buddy. The dog responded in the smallest way. He lifted his head and scooted forward, pressing his neck close enough for Ryan to carefully tilt the tag with 2 fingers through the metal bars. The moment Ryan's thumb brushed the engraving, a chill ran through him. The metal was cold, almost unnaturally so, and worn smooth in certain places where a handler's fingers would have touched it repeatedly. Perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of comfort. Ryan angled it toward the light. Deep scratches, faded letters, but not unreadable. His heart gave a sudden, sharp thud. Claire, he breathed. Did you ever actually read this? Claire shook her head. We tried, but the markings looked damaged. We assumed it was just an old serial number. No, Ryan said softly. This wasn't scratched accidentally. Someone carved this in. Shadow's eyes locked onto Ryan's fingers on the tag, as though he recognized the touch, the weight, the meaning. His ears perked slightly. His breathing changed, subtle but noticeable. The dog remembered. Ryan swallowed and angled the tag closer to the dim light. The message became clear, simple, haunting, deliberate. His breath caught. Oh my God! Claire leaned in. What does it say? Ryan's voice was barely above a whisper. It says, if you find me, someone still believes I matter. Claire froze. Shadow let out a soft, broken whine, the first sound he had made since Ryan arrived. Ryan stared at the tag, his chest tightening, the meaning slicing through him with chilling clarity. This wasn't just an ID. This wasn't a random message. This was a plea, a warning, a clue. And suddenly Ryan knew. This dog's story wasn't just sad. It was unfinished. For a long, breathless moment, Ryan just stared at the tag resting between his fingers. The words, faint, carved by hand, worn by time, echoed in his mind like a whisper carried through years of silence. If you find me, someone still believes I matter. This wasn't the kind of message a handler carved casually. This was desperation, hope wrapped in heartbreak, a message left for a future that the writer didn't trust himself to see. Claire took a step back, goosebumps rising on her arms. Why would someone carve that on a K9's collar? Her voice trembled. Ryan, that sounds like someone was afraid of something. Ryan didn't answer. Not immediately. His thumb moved gently across the letters, tracing the grooves worn by time and emotion. The weight of the tag felt heavier now, charged with a meaning he couldn't shake. Shadow lowered his head again, but his eyes never left Ryan's face. There was something pleading in them, something raw, broken, and yearning, as though he'd been waiting for someone to finally understand. Ryan whispered, He didn't get lost. Did he, boy? Shadow blinked slowly. Claire exhaled shakily. We thought someone abandoned him. But what if he didn't belong to someone who could come back? Ryan finally looked at her, the tension in his jaw unmistakable. This wasn't abandonment. This was a message, a clue. Someone wanted him found. Found by who? Claire asked. Ryan shook his head. Someone they trusted. Someone who would notice this. He looked down at his own hands, calloused, trained, familiar with the weight of duty. He understood that kind of trust. His voice grew quieter. Someone like a fellow officer. Claire's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Ryan, do you think the handler is— I don't know, Ryan cut in gently. But I'm starting to think he didn't give this dog up willingly. A faint whine escaped. Shadow, almost as if he agreed. Ryan pressed the tag back gently against the dog's chest. Shadow's breathing shuddered, and he stepped closer to the bars, closer than he'd been to anyone since he arrived at the shelter. Look at him, Ryan murmured. "This isn't a dog who was cast aside. He's loyal to a fault. Something happened. Something big." Claire wrapped her arms around herself. "Do you think we should contact the department?" Ryan shook his head again, slower this time. "Not yet. If there's a reason this message needed to stay hidden, I need to understand what it is before anyone else gets involved." Claire frowned. "Are you saying there might be danger?" Ryan's eyes darkened, not with fear, but with the familiar instinct of a man who'd walked through danger enough times to recognize its scent. "I'm saying this is more than a routine case," he replied, "and if Shadow's handler left this message, it means something went wrong." The shelter seemed to grow colder, the hum of the lights fading beneath the weight of the revelation settling between them. Shadow stepped forward again, resting his scarred nose against the bars, right where Ryan's hand was. Ryan gently pressed his palm to the same spot. "All right, boy," he whispered. "I hear you." And for the first time, Shadow closed his eyes, not in fear, but in fragile, exhausted relief. Ryan couldn't shake the weight of the message carved into Shadow's collar. It clung to him, echoing in every corner of his mind long after he stepped out of the shelter. The sky outside had darkened, a gray blanket settling across the city, but Ryan didn't head home. Instead, he sat in his patrol car, engine off, staring at the dashboard as memories and intuition tugged at him. Something about Shadow, something about that message, felt wrong in a way that demanded answers. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the number he needed. Officer Greenwood, the department's records officer. Knowledgeable, reliable, and discreet. The line rang twice. "Cole," Greenwood answered, surprised. "You're off today. Everything okay?" Ryan hesitated. "I need information." Quietly. Greenwood paused. "This about what I think it is?" Ryan sighed. "You heard about the retired K-9 brought into the shelter?" "Yeah," Greenwood said. "Shadow, right? Rumor was that his handler disappeared." "Not disappeared," Ryan replied firmly. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." There was a restless shuffling on the other end. "Look, Ryan, the case files on that dog's team were weird. Redacted pages, restricted notes. It looked like someone higher up didn't want eyes on it." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Can you send me what you have access to?" A long exhale. "I'll see what I can find, but if someone scrubbed things intentionally, it won't be much." Ryan leaned back in his seat, staring out through the windshield. "Anything is better than nothing." "Give me 10 minutes, Greenwood said, then hung up. The waiting felt like an hour. Traffic rumbled faintly in the distance. A light drizzle tapped against the car roof. Ryan drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his instincts growing sharper, louder. He knew what a cut-and-buried file looked like. He'd seen enough to recognize the pattern. Finally, his phone buzzed. Greenwood had sent over a handful of documents, partially redacted reports, short deployment summaries, old vet check logs, and a final entry from the handler. Ryan opened them one by one, scanning quickly. Shadow's service record was exemplary. High-risk assignments, bomb sweeps, missing person rescues. A dog like that didn't simply get lost. Then Ryan opened the last file, the final field report. It was dated 8 months ago, marked confidential. Most of the page was redacted in thick black lines, but the closing sentence remained untouched. Shadow refused to leave the scene. He kept searching long after we called him back. He knew something was wrong. Ryan's stomach tightened. Another line caught his eye, written in a different pen, added after the report was filed. "If anything happens to me, someone will need to take care of him." No signature, no explanation. Ryan felt the air leave his lungs. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't abandonment. This was a warning, a breadcrumb trail, and Shadow. Shadow was the only living witness left. Ryan sat in his patrol car long after reading the final handwritten message. Cars passed by, headlights streaking across his windshield, but he barely noticed. His mind was consumed by one name, a name that suddenly felt heavier than every case he'd worked in years. Officer Matt Hale, Shadow's handler, the man whose life was intertwined with the dog now lying forgotten in a shelter. Ryan opened the next file Greenwood had sent, a personnel summary. Hale had been decorated, respected, known for being calm under pressure and fiercely loyal to his K-9. But his last months on duty were strange, marked with unexplained absences, odd transfers, and confidential notes that didn't match a typical officer's file. Something had happened to him, something the department didn't want to talk about. Ryan pressed the phone to his ear and called Greenwood again. He answered in a hushed tone. "Cole, you need to tread carefully. I went further into the archives. Hale's case isn't normal." Ryan's grip on the wheel tightened. Define not normal. There was a long pause, as though Greenwood was choosing his words carefully. When Hale went missing, there was no official search party, no press briefing, no departmental alert. Nothing. It was all quietly filed away. Ryan froze. A missing officer doesn't get swept under the rug. "Exactly," Greenwood whispered. "Unless someone didn't want it investigated." Ryan's pulse quickened. "Why?" Greenwood exhaled sharply. "I found a disciplinary report. Redacted, but I caught enough to understand the implication. Hale filed a complaint a month before he disappeared. Something about corruption within a specialized task force." Ryan's stomach dropped. "Internal corruption?" "Not just internal," Greenwood murmured. "He accused a lieutenant of falsifying evidence, manipulating deployments, and using K-9 units to cover illegal activity." Ryan sank back into his seat, his breath catching. The words felt unreal, too heavy, too dangerous to say aloud. "Hale was warned to back off," Greenwood continued, "but he didn't. 4 weeks later, his last known operation was classified and sealed. The next day, he vanished." Ryan whispered, "And Shadow?" "Found, wandering near an abandoned warehouse 2 days later, with that message on his collar." "Cole, Hale didn't run away. Something happened to him." Ryan closed his eyes, every instinct screaming now. Hale's message wasn't carved in fear, it was carved in certainty. A dying certainty. "If you find me, someone still believes I matter." Shadow wasn't abandoned. He was left behind with a purpose. Ryan's thoughts raced. Why would the department leave Shadow at a shelter instead of investigating? Greenwood hesitated, then said quietly, "Because bringing attention to Shadow meant bringing attention to Hale, and someone didn't want that." A slow dread crept up Ryan's spine. "You're saying someone in the department silenced him." "I'm saying be careful," Greenwood warned. "If you dig, they'll know." Ryan ended the call and stared at the city lights outside. Every truth he uncovered brought a darker shadow with it. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not with the pieces lining up this clearly. He thought of Shadow, silent, grieving, loyal to the last breath. A dog trained to detect danger. And somewhere along the way he had detected the greatest danger of all. The danger that took his handler. Ryan whispered into the empty car, "I'll find the truth, Hale. For you. For him." The city felt colder suddenly, as though it knew what Ryan was planning. And somewhere in the shelter, Shadow lifted his head, sensing the shift. Ryan returned to the shelter early the next morning. He barely slept, his mind replaying every file, every redacted sentence, every warning. But above all, he kept seeing Shadow's eyes. Those deep, wounded eyes that held a truth no document could reveal. When he walked into the dim, quiet shelter corridor, Shadow lifted his head instantly. No barking, no hesitation, just recognition. As if he had been waiting. Claire approached with a puzzled look. "He's been restless since sunrise, pacing, watching the door like he knew you'd come." Ryan knelt by the kennel. "Morning, Shadow." The dog pressed closer to the bars, something new, flickering in his gaze, a spark of intent. "I need time with him," Ryan said softly. Claire nodded, unlocking the kennel with a cautious glance. "Be careful. He's gentle, but he has trauma." The gate swung open. Shadow stepped out slowly, not like an excited dog finally free, but like a soldier leaving a barracks. Focused, purposeful. Ryan clipped a temporary leash on him, but Shadow hardly needed guiding. He took 3 steps, stopped, turned, and looked up at Ryan. Then he pulled forward. Not wildly, not hesitantly, with direction. Ryan followed, out the shelter doors, through the parking lot, across the street. Shadow walked with a memory-driven certainty, his nose occasionally lifting to test the air. His ears twitched at every sound, muscles shifting beneath his dull fur like dormant instincts awakening. "Where are you taking me?" Ryan whispered, letting the dog lead. Shadow turned sharply down a quiet industrial street, not toward a park, not toward noise or food, but toward something heavier. As they walked, Ryan noticed Shadow's pace change, faster, more urgent. They approached a chain-link fence surrounding a long-abandoned warehouse. Ryan's heart lurched. This was the same location Animal Control had found him wandering near. Shadow stopped at the gate, pressing his nose against the rusted metal. He let out a low, trembling whine. Not fear, recognition. Ryan swallowed hard and squeezed through a hole in the fence, motioning for Shadow to follow. Inside, the warehouse grounds stretched out like a graveyard of forgotten memories. Broken crates, scattered debris, cracked concrete. Shadow didn't hesitate. He walked straight to a large steel door on the side of the building. The moment he reached it, he sat down, placing a single paw on the base of the door. Ryan crouched beside him. "What happened here?" he murmured. Shadow didn't move, but his eyes glistened, locked on the door as if the truth behind it was carved into his soul. Ryan felt a chill crawl down his spine. Shadow hadn't led him to a random place. He had led him to the last place he saw his handler alive. The steel door loomed over Ryan like a monument to a buried truth. Rust traced jagged lines across its surface, and faint scratch marks, deep, frantic, clawed the metal near the bottom. Shadow's paw rested on one of them, his body trembling with a memory he could not speak. Ryan crouched, running his fingers lightly over the scratches. "These are from you, aren't they?" he whispered. Shadow didn't move, didn't blink. His stillness was answer enough. Ryan pushed the door gently. Locked. He stood, looking around until he spotted a broken side window. With a grunt, he hoisted himself up and climbed through, landing inside with a thud that echoed through the dark, hollow warehouse. "Come on," he called quietly. Shadow slipped through the gap effortlessly, landing beside him with silent precision, years of training still, etched in every movement. Inside, the air was thick with dust and neglect. Sunlight cut thin beams through gaps in the roof, illuminating floating specks and casting eerie shadows across the floor. Debris littered the ground, splintered wood, discarded tools, empty crates. But it wasn't the chaos that tightened Ryan's chest, it was the sense of absence, an emptiness that felt intentional. Shadow moved forward slowly, nose low, tail stiff, posture rigid. Ryan followed, watching the dog's body language shift from caution to familiarity. Every few steps, Shadow stopped and sniffed the ground, the walls, the air. Then he'd move again, as if following an invisible trail. He led Ryan to a spot in the center of the warehouse, a large oil stain on the concrete floor. Shadow circled it once, twice, then lay down beside it. Ryan knelt, his heartbeat hammering. "What happened here, boy?" Shadow's ears flattened, his breathing grew shallow. He placed his head on the concrete, eyes closing for a moment, like the memory hurt more than any wound. Ryan scanned the floor more carefully. Mixed into the stain were faint marks, footprints, scuffs, dragged patterns, signs of a struggle, and beneath a broken crate nearby, something glinted. Ryan reached for it. A bullet casing. Standard police issued. His breath caught. Hale was here, he muttered. Shadow let out a quiet whine, nudging the floor with his nose before backing up, tail tucked, not in fear, but in grief. Ryan stood abruptly, the pieces snapping together in his mind. Hale hadn't disappeared. He hadn't run. He hadn't abandoned his partner. He'd been ambushed. Ryan searched the area more frantically now. Near a stack of crates, he found a torn scrap of dark fabric, part of a police tactical vest. Not standard issue, modified. His pulse tightened. Was this connected to the corruption Hale tried to expose? Shadow barked suddenly, a sharp, urgent sound. Ryan turned to see him, pawing at the wall. Something was wedged between two cracked bricks. Ryan pulled it out. A body cam. Damaged. Cracked, but still intact. His breath shook. "Dear God," he whispered, "this is Hale's." Shadow pressed against his leg, whining softly. The dog knew. He had seen it happen. He had been here. He had fought to save his handler. Ryan wiped dust from the camera lens. It didn't power on, but the memory card was still inside. He held it carefully like it was a fragile piece of truth. "Hale didn't disappear," Ryan said, voice trembling with anger. "He tried to expose something, and they silenced him." Shadow rested his head against Ryan's thigh, eyes filled with a pain only a loyal partner could carry. Ryan placed a hand on the dog's back. "We'll find justice," he whispered, "for both of you." And for the first time, Shadow leaned fully into him, trusting him with a truth buried in darkness for too long. Ryan stormed into the precinct next morning with Shadow walking sharply at his side, no longer the timid, withdrawn dog he'd been. There was purpose in his steps now, memory, duty, the kind that didn't fade with time or fear. Officers glanced up as he passed, whispering. Ryan never brought dogs inside unless it was serious, and the look in his eyes told them this wasn't protocol. This was personal. He didn't knock on the lieutenant's door. He pushed it open. Lieutenant Marsh looked up from his desk, startled. "Cole, what's the meaning of this? And why is there a retired K-9 in my office?" Ryan placed the damaged body cam on the desk, then the bullet casing, then the torn tactical fabric. Marsh stiffened. "We need to talk about Officer Matt Hale," Ryan said, voice low but steady. Marsh sighed, leaning back. "Cole, we've been over this. Hale's case is closed. He walked away from duty, left the dog behind. Unfortunate, yes, but—" "He didn't walk away," Ryan snapped. Shadow growled, softly, a deep, controlled rumble that made Marsh's face pale. Ryan leaned forward. "You told this department that Hale abandoned his partner, that he left Shadow to roam the streets, but that was a lie." Marsh's jaw tightened. "Watch yourself." "No," Ryan said. "You watch this." He slid the body cam closer across the desk. Hale hid this because he knew someone would bury it. He left a message on Shadow's collar because he knew he wouldn't survive. Marsh didn't touch the device. "Cole," he said slowly, "you're making dangerous accusations." Ryan stepped closer, eyes burning. "Hale filed a corruption complaint. He accused someone in this building of manipulating evidence and using K-9 operations to cover criminal activity. And you ignored it. Then Hale goes missing. Shadow shows up alone. And you want me to believe it's a coincidence?" Marsh swallowed hard but forced a calm expression. "You're reading too much into scraps. There's no proof." Shadow suddenly nudged the body cam with his nose, pushing it toward Marsh. Ryan's voice softened but grew colder. "This memory card might contain the proof, and you know it." Marsh's gaze flicked toward the door, toward the windows, anywhere but at Ryan. "Cole, you need to drop this, for your own good," Ryan exhaled, stepping back. "I'm not dropping anything. Hale was one of ours. Shadow watched him die, and someone in this department wanted that truth buried. Marcia's mask faltered. Ryan clipped the leash gently onto Shadow. "If you won't reopen the case, I will." And with that, Ryan turned and walked out, Shadow at his heel, head held high like a soldier marching back into war. The Hale residence sat at the edge of town, a modest, aging home with chipped paint and a sagging porch, the kind that carried memories heavier than its walls could hold. Ryan hesitated at the bottom step, Shadow standing beside him with an alertness that felt almost human. Shadow stared at the front door, not fearful, not confused, but remembering. Ryan took a slow breath and knocked. The door opened a moment later, revealing a woman in her late 50s, pale, tired eyes, grief carved into her features like permanent shadows. She blinked in surprise when she saw Ryan in uniform, then froze entirely when she saw Shadow. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Shadow," she whispered. The dog stepped forward, tail low, not wagging, but trembling. Recognition flickered in his eyes, a deep, aching kind. The woman knelt instantly, tears spilling as Shadow gently pressed his head into her chest. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, stroking his worn fur. "I thought, they told me, you were gone too." Ryan stood quietly, giving them a moment. When she finally stood, wiping her cheeks, she spoke softly. "I'm Matt's mother. Officer Cole, right? Matt used to mention you." Ryan nodded. "Yes, ma'am. That's actually why I'm here." Her expression tightened with dread. "It's about my son, isn't it?" Ryan swallowed. "There are things you deserve to know. Things the department didn't tell you." She led him inside, Shadow staying close as if protecting the last piece of his handler's world. The living room was filled with framed photos. Matt posing with Shadow during training, Matt receiving commendations, Matt smiling proudly with his mother. But one frame stood out. A picture of Matt kneeling beside Shadow, both looking into the camera with unwavering loyalty. She sat on the couch, hands trembling slightly. "They told me he left. They told me he walked away from his duty. But Matt would never abandon his partner. Never." Ryan sat across from her. He didn't walk away. He was investigating corruption within a specialized task force. He filed a complaint, and shortly after, he disappeared. Her breath hitched. "You mean, someone hurt him?" Ryan nodded slowly. "Yes, and I believe Shadow saw what happened." She looked at the dog, eyes filling again. "He came home once, just before Matt went missing. He was anxious, wouldn't sleep. Matt brushed it off." Her voice trembled. "He told me if anything ever happened to him, Shadow would try to come back." Shadow nudged her knee gently as if responding to her words. Ryan lowered his voice. "I found Hale's body cam. It was hidden, damaged, but the memory card may still work. It could prove what happened." Her eyes widened with a mix of hope and grief. "Then find the truth, Officer Cole. Please, Matt deserves that much." Shadow rested his head in her lap, letting her stroke him slowly, as if comforting her the way Matt once had. Ryan stood. "I promise, ma'am. I'll finish what your son started." She whispered, voice breaking, "Thank you for bringing his partner home." Shadow closed his eyes, finally for the first time in months, at peace in a familiar home. Ryan sat, alone in his apartment that night, the room dim except for the glow of his laptop. The damaged body cam lay on the table beside him, its cracked shell a silent reminder of everything Hale had tried to reveal. Next to it, the extracted memory card rested inside a small USB reader, waiting. His heart thudded in his chest as he clicked play. The video flickered to life. At first, only static. Then faint audio. A voice, Hale's voice, breathing hard, whispering instructions to Shadow. Ryan leaned forward, palms sweating. The feed jumped, distorted. but enough remained to piece together the horror of Hale's final moments. Shouts, footsteps, a struggle, then a voice Ryan recognized, a high-ranking officer's voice, ordering Hale to stay out of things he didn't understand. A gunshot, Shadow barking frantically, and finally Hale's voice trembling with fading strength. Shadow, if you find someone you trust, show them. Ryan shut his eyes, chest tightening. This was it. The evidence Hale died protecting. The next morning, Ryan walked straight into the precinct with Shadow beside him. This time, he didn't go to Marsh's office. He went to the media room, where reporters were gathering for the department's weekly briefing. Marsh spotted him instantly. His eyes widened in panic. "Cole, what do you think you're—" Ryan ignored him. He stepped up to the podium, inserted the USB into the display system, and pressed play. The room fell silent. Reporters leaned forward. Officers froze. Marsh's face drained of color as Hale's final moments filled the screen, grainy but undeniable. Whispers erupted, cameras clicked, phones recorded. Marsh stammered, stepping forward. "Turn that off. This footage is unauthorized." Ryan raised his voice over him. "This is evidence in the death of Officer Matt Hale, a case this department concealed." Gasps scattered across the room. He continued, eyes burning with conviction. Hale uncovered corruption. He was silenced, and his partner Shadow was left alone to die in the streets. Shadow stood tall beside him, not barking, not growling, but watching the room with the solemn posture of a soldier demanding justice. A reporter called out, "Officer Cole, are you saying the department covered up Hale's murder?" Ryan nodded. "Yes." Chaos erupted. Questions, shouts, cameras flashing. But Ryan didn't waver. Shadow pressed lightly against his leg as if reminding him why this mattered. Internal Affairs stormed in minutes later, taking Marsh into custody as he sputtered and protested. Officers Ryan respected for years stared in disbelief, betrayal etched across their faces. As Marsh was led away, his glare locked onto Ryan. "You've ruined yourself, Cole." Ryan met his eyes coldly. "No, I did what Hale died doing, the right thing." More officers gathered around, some in tears, some angry, all shaken. But none approached closer than Shadow, who finally leaned against Ryan's leg with a quiet sigh. Relief, grief, and victory intertwined. For the first time since Hale's death, Shadow wasn't alone in carrying the truth anymore, and the world finally knew what happened. The days following the public revelation were a whirlwind. Investigators flooding the precinct, officers pulled aside for questioning, news vans parked outside like vultures waiting for the next break in the story. But through it all, one image remained constant. Shadow at Ryan's side. The dog refused to leave him, walking beside him with a steadiness that felt almost symbolic. Two soldiers standing together after surviving a battlefield neither of them had chosen. One evening, after hours of debriefings and statements, Ryan stepped out into the fading sunlight. The sky burned soft orange, the world finally quiet after days of uproar. Shadow followed him out, settling at his feet with a tired groan. Ryan sat on the steps of the precinct, elbows resting on his knees. "You know," he murmured, "after everything we've been through, I still don't know where you're supposed to go." Shadow lifted his head, ears perked, watching him with that same deep, searching gaze, the kind that felt almost human. "You don't have a handler anymore," Ryan continued softly. "No home to go back to, and the department, they've already stamped your file. Retired, unassigned." He exhaled. "You deserve more than that." Shadow shifted closer, placing his head gently on Ryan's knee. Warm, trusting, choosing. Ryan felt a tightness in his chest, something between grief and acceptance. "Hale trusted me with you," he whispered. "He left that message for someone he believed would understand." He reached down, brushing his fingers lightly over Shadow's collar. The same worn leather, the same carved words that had changed everything. "If you find me, someone still believes I matter." Ryan swallowed, hard. "You matter, Shadow, more than you know." The dog's tail thumped weakly against the ground. A small sound, but the most hope-filled gesture Ryan had seen from him. Footsteps approached. Claire stood nearby, watching them with a soft smile. "You two look like you've been a team for years," she said quietly. Ryan looked at her, then at Shadow. "Feels like he's been waiting for someone to step up." Claire nodded. "Then maybe it's time you did." Silence hung for a moment, warm, unspoken, certain. Ryan stood slowly. Shadow stood with him. "All right, buddy," Ryan said, voice steady with decision. "If you want a home, you've got one. With me." Shadow pressed against his leg, letting out a soft huff that sounded almost like relief. A soldier finally allowed to rest. Ryan clipped a new leash onto the old collar, not to restrain him, but to mark a beginning. "Let's go home," he whispered. And together they walked into the evening. Two lives, broken by the same tragedy, now healing side by side. Ryan's apartment felt different that night, not because anything inside had changed, but because of the presence padding softly across the living room floor. Shadow explored slowly, sniffing corners, testing the softness of the rug, pausing at the window as if he expected to be called back to duty at any moment. But tonight, there were no commands, no missions, no gunshots or dark alleys, just warmth, just safety, just home. Ryan leaned against the doorway, watching the dog move with a mixture of caution and wonder. "Make yourself comfortable," he said softly. "This place is yours now, too." Shadow turned his head, ears flicking at the sound of Ryan's voice. He took a few steps toward him, then paused in front of the couch. Slowly, almost shyly, he lifted his front paws and climbed up. The moment his body sank into the cushions, a deep breath left him. Not tiredness, release. A soldier finally laying down his armor. Ryan crossed the room and sat beside him, careful not to crowd the dog. Shadow shifted until his head rested on Ryan's thigh, eyes half closed, breathing steady and warm. Ryan's throat tightened. How long had this dog waited to feel safe again? How many nights had he curled up on cold concrete floors, waiting for a handler who would never return? How many times had he looked at strangers, hoping one might recognize the carved message on his collar? Ryan gently lifted the tag, letting it rest in his palm. The letters glinted faintly in the soft lamplight. "If you find me, someone still believes I matter." "You mattered to him," Ryan whispered, "and now you matter to me." Shadow let out a quiet exhale, eyelids fluttering shut. Trust, real trust, began to settle between them. Hours passed, and for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt still. The world outside could rage, investigations could continue, news could twist the story, but here, in this small quiet space, two broken souls were finding peace. A soft knock sounded at the door. Ryan stood carefully, leaving Shadow resting on the couch. When he opened the door, he found Hale's mother standing there, a small box in her hands. I hope this isn't a bad time," she said. Ryan shook his head gently. "Never." She stepped inside, eyes softening when she saw Shadow sleeping peacefully. "I kept this after Matt disappeared," she said, opening the box. Inside lay an old folded photo. Hale kneeling beside Shadow on the day they graduated K-9 training. Both young, both full of promise. She handed it to Ryan. "He would want you to have this." Ryan felt emotion swell in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. She looked at Shadow, tears gathering but not falling. "He's home now," she said quietly. "Not with Matt, but with someone Matt would trust." Ryan placed the photo on the shelf near the couch. "I'll protect him," he said. "The way he protected all of us." As she left, Ryan returned to the couch. Shadow opened one eye, lifting his head slightly. Ryan smiled. "Don't worry, buddy. I'm not going anywhere." Shadow rested his head back down, a final sigh escaping him, the sound of a heart finally allowed to rest. And in the warmth of that small apartment, healer and hero lay side by side, proving that even the most forgotten souls can find a home again.